I still remember the exact moment my dream was ripped away from me. It happened in the middle of a brightly lit conference room, filled with suits, polished marble tables, and a skyline view of the city I had once thought I would conquer. And the man who did it? A man I used to call my mentor. His name was Victor Langford, CEO of Langford Technologies, one of the most powerful corporations in the country. He had the kind of smile that made investors swoon and competitors sweat. To the world, he was a visionary. To me, he was the person who promised to help turn my tiny startup into something extraordinary. I was only 28 at the time, barely keeping my head above water, but I had created something I knew could change the world. It was a revolutionary piece of software, a system that could streamline energy grids and cut costs by nearly 30%. Clean, efficient, groundbreaking. Investors had laughed me out of the room when I first pitched it. Too young, too inexperienced, they said. But Victor hadn't laughed. He had leaned across the table, clasped my hand, and said, "You're brilliant. I'll make sure the world knows it too." I believed him. For months, I worked side by side with his team. I gave presentations, shared my research, answered every question. Victor said the deal was simple. Langford Technologies would buy into my startup, give me the resources I needed, and together we'd roll it out on a global scale. I would stay on as the Chief Innovation Officer. My baby, my invention, would finally have wings. But that morning in the conference room, the truth hit me like a blade. Victor slid a stack of papers across the table toward me, his smile as polished as ever. "We've made some adjustments," he said smoothly. "For efficiency." I skimmed the first few pages. My chest tightened. The words blurred. According to the new terms, I wasn't staying on as Chief Innovation Officer. I wasn't staying on at all. The papers stripped me of ownership, erased my rights to the technology, and transferred everything, to Langford Technologies. This isn't the agreement we made," I stammered. My voice cracked, but I forced myself to keep reading. My name was gone. My company was gone. I had been written out of my own creation like I had never existed. Victor leaned back in his chair, unbothered, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. "You're talented," he said. "But talent isn't enough. You don't have the experience, the connections, the resources. You'd only slow us down. This is for the best." The board members nodded silently, their eyes avoiding mine. They weren't here for me. They were here for Victor. I pushed the papers back toward him, my hands trembling. "I won't sign this. This is theft." Victor's smile didn't falter. "Then you walk away with nothing. No funding, no resources, no protection. And when we release the product under our name, no one will even remember you had anything to do with it." The words crashed over me like ice water. "Sign it," he said quietly, almost kindly. "Or get out." The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. My throat burned. My palms were damp. Around me, the city skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a cruel reminder of how close I had come to reaching it all. Finally, I pushed back my chair. The screech echoed in the room like a scream. My legs felt weak as I stood, but I refused to let them see me cry. "You'll regret this," I whispered. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise I didn't yet know how to keep. Victor chuckled, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "No, my dear," he said smoothly, gathering the papers back into a neat stack. "The only thing you'll regret is thinking you could ever play at my level." The board members laughed politely. My face burned. I turned and walked out, my chest so tight I could hardly breathe. That was the day my dream was stolen. But what Victor didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in his arrogance, he had overlooked something. A detail buried deep in the foundation of the software. Something only I knew about. And one day, when the time was right, I would use it to bring his empire crashing down. The news spread faster than I could breathe. By the time I got back to my apartment that night, Langford Technologies had already filed the paperwork. Headlines splashed across every business site. Langford Technologies unveils revolutionary energy system. Victor Langford does it again. And just like that, the invention I had spent years perfecting was no longer mine. My name wasn't mentioned once. I had been erased. At first, I thought maybe, just maybe, Someone would defend me. A journalist I'd pitched to months ago. An investor I had begged for a meeting. A former colleague who knew the truth. But the silence was deafening. No one wanted to go up against Victor Langford. He was too powerful. Too polished. Too untouchable. My inbox filled with messages overnight, but not the kind I wanted. Friends asking what happened. Strangers calling me naive, stupid, unprofessional. Blogs speculating I had tried to scam Langford with faulty tech, and he had rescued it from me. The humiliation cut deeper than the betrayal. It wasn't just that Victor stole my dream, it was that the world believed it had always been his. Within weeks, I was broke. My tiny startup had been strangled to death. My reputation in the industry was toxic. Recruiters who once called me brilliant now ignored my applications. Landlords didn't care about betrayal, they cared about rent. I sold my car. I sold my furniture. I cut corners until there was nothing left to cut. And then came the day I opened my fridge and found nothing but half a bottle of ketchup and expired milk. I sat on the floor and cried until I couldn't breathe. I thought that was the end of me. But sometimes, life has a way of sharpening you when you think you're broken. One evening, desperate for distraction, I dug through the dusty files on my old hard drive. I don't know what I was looking for, maybe proof that I once mattered, maybe just scraps of pride. That's when I found it. Buried in the original code of the system, the one I had built long before Victor's lawyers got their claws into it, was something only I knew existed. A failsafe. I had designed it during the early days, back when I feared hackers might try to steal my work. It was a hidden protocol, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. And it gave me control. Not of everything, but enough. Enough to prove the system was mine. Enough to twist the knife if I ever chose to. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the code. Victor's engineers had copied my work line by line, but they hadn't erased this. They didn't even know it was there. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. I felt power. But power without a plan is just chaos. And I wasn't ready yet. I needed money. Connections. Allies. If I struck too soon, Victor would bury me all over again. But if I waited, if I played my cards right, I could do more than expose him. I could destroy him. The thought terrified me. But it also thrilled me. Over the next few weeks, I took whatever work I could find. Freelance coding jobs. Late-night data cleanup for companies that paid barely enough to survive. I ate cheap noodles, slept on a mattress on the floor, and counted every dollar. But with each line of code I wrote for someone else, I was secretly rewriting my own future. Testing, refining, strengthening the failsafe. It became my secret weapon, my lifeline. And then, one night, while I was sipping bitter coffee in a dingy cafe, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Two men in suits at the next table were talking about Langford Technologies. They were mid-level execs, probably drunk enough to forget the walls had ears. "Victor's moving too fast," one of them muttered. "He's pushing the system out globally before it's stable. If it fails," the other man laughed bitterly. "If it fails, we'll cover it up. That's what we always do." I froze, my hands tightening around the mug. Global rollout. Unstable system. Cover-ups. Victor wasn't just greedy, he was reckless. He was gambling with an entire industry, maybe even millions of people who would rely on this technology. And I realized something. I didn't just have the power to take back what was mine. I had the power to stop him before he ruined everything. My revenge wasn't just personal anymore. It was necessary. I packed up my laptop, my heart racing. For the first time since my world had collapsed, I felt alive. Victor Langford thought he had erased me. But he had no idea I was still here. And soon, the world would know the truth. Revenge is not something you rush. It's something you sharpen. I knew if I went after Victor Langford too soon, I'd lose again. He had lawyers, money, influence, and an entire machine of loyal executives who would bury me before I got a word out. So I stayed quiet. I became a ghost. For the outside world, I was finished, a failed entrepreneur who had been chewed up and spit out by the system. People whispered about me in the industry, called me naive, a cautionary tale. That was fine. Let them laugh. Let them forget about me. Ghosts work best when no one sees them coming. In reality, every single day, I was preparing. I worked out of coffee shops, cheap co-working spaces, sometimes even public libraries, my laptop always humming with code. Piece by piece, I built something new. Not just an improved version of the system Victor had stolen, but something bigger, smarter, faster. And every line of code carried a secret, my failsafe. The backdoor Victor didn't know existed. The more I refined it, the more control I had. By the time I was finished, I wouldn't just be able to expose him. I'd be able to pull the plug on his empire with a keystroke. But I couldn't do it alone. I started reconnecting with old contacts carefully, quietly. People who had been burned by Victor before. Former employees he had discarded. Investors who had lost money while he covered his tracks. I didn't tell them everything. I just planted seeds, little hints that maybe Victor Langford wasn't the genius everyone believed. Some laughed. Some dismissed me. But a few leaned closer, their eyes sharp, hungry. That was how I met Ethan Cross. Ethan had once been one of Victor's golden boys, head of operations, a man groomed for the executive suite. But 3 years ago, he'd been pushed out under mysterious circumstances. Rumor was, he had uncovered some accounting fraud and refused to play along. Victor made sure Ethan's career in corporate leadership was over. Now, Ethan was running a small consulting firm out of a shabby office. But when I told him what Victor had done to me, and what I had in my hands, he didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and said, "Tell me everything." For the first time, I wasn't alone. Ethan had knowledge I didn't, internal processes, how Victor thought, how his board operated, where his blind spots were. He knew the pressure points inside Langford Technologies, and together, we mapped them out like generals planning a war. But we needed more than information. We needed leverage. So I went hunting. I filed anonymous tips to journalists, just enough to make them sniff around Victor's projects. I reached out to regulators, pointing them toward inconsistencies in Langford's filings. I even uploaded pieces of my original research to open-source communities, under aliases, to stir whispers in the academic world about who really invented the system. Every move was small, subtle, untraceable. But together, they began to form cracks in Victor's perfect image. And then, a miracle, a rival company reached out. A giant in the industry, Helios Energy Systems, had caught wind of my work. They didn't know my full story, but they'd seen enough whispers to suspect Victor's innovation wasn't as flawless as he claimed. Their head of strategy, a sharp woman named Lena Torres, invited me to a discreet meeting. She wanted to know if the rumors were true. I didn't give her everything, not yet. But I gave her just enough. Enough to make her eyes light up with interest. Enough to make her realize Victor Langford wasn't untouchable. By the time I walked out of that meeting, I had something I hadn't had in a long time: resources, funding, protection. Now I had allies. Now I had power. Still, I waited. I sharpened my weapon. Victor was rolling out the system faster than ever, pushing it into dozens of cities, promising billions in savings. Shareholders were ecstatic. The media fawned over him. But underneath, Ethan and I could see the cracks. Stability issues. Incomplete testing. Corners cut. It was a time bomb. And then, almost too perfectly, the invitation arrived. Langford Technologies was hosting a global showcase event. Victor would be unveiling the final stage of the rollout, live-streamed worldwide. Every investor, every regulator, every journalist would be watching. Ethan slid the glossy invitation across the table to me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "This is it," he said. "The moment he crowns himself king." I picked it up, tracing the embossed letters with my thumb. My heart raced. This wasn't just an opportunity. This was the stage I had been waiting for. Because at that event, at the very moment Victor tried to cement his legacy, I would be there. And with one keystroke, I would rip the crown off his head. The night of the showcase arrived like a storm rolling in. Langford Technologies had spared no expense. The event was being held in one of the most extravagant convention centers in the city: crystal chandeliers, velvet carpets, massive LED screens flashing Victor Langford's face alongside words like innovation, future and revolution. Outside, a line of luxury cars stretched around the block, carrying investors, politicians, journalists, and industry leaders. Victor wanted the world to see him as untouchable, a king in his palace. I slipped through the crowd like a shadow. No one noticed me. Why would they? To them, I was a ghost, a name long forgotten. My badge didn't say who I really was. It was courtesy of Ethan, who still had old contacts in security. Officially, I was just another analyst from a minor consultancy. But in my bag was the weapon that would change everything. My laptop. My failsafe. Backstage, Victor was surrounded by assistants, publicists, and handlers. He was dressed in a sleek black suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile radiating confidence. Cameras followed his every move. He thrived on it. He lived for this kind of spotlight. Tonight, I overheard him say to one of his board members, "We prove once, and for all that Langford Technologies is the only name that matters." I bit back a bitter laugh. Soon, his name would matter for an entirely different reason. The lights dimmed. The crowd hushed. A booming voice announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the visionary, the pioneer, the future of clean energy, Victor Langford." The audience erupted into applause as Victor strutted onto the stage. He spread his arms wide, basking in their adoration. Behind him, the giant screens lit up with dazzling graphics of glowing cities, sparkling grids, and the promise of a cleaner, brighter tomorrow. I slipped into position at a small side table where technicians monitored the live stream. No one questioned me. I looked like I belonged. Ethan's connections had paid off. Victor launched into his speech, his voice full of practiced charm. He talked about innovation, about changing the world, about leaving behind a legacy for future generations. The audience hung on his every word. But I wasn't listening to him. My hands were steady as I opened my laptop and connected to the network. Lines of code scrolled across my screen. My failsafe was waiting, coiled like a serpent ready to strike. Victor turned to the big screen and gestured grandly. "And now, let me show you what the future truly looks like." The screen flickered, displaying a live feed of energy grids across the world. Cities pulsed with light. Towers glowed. Data streams danced like fireworks. It was impressive, breathtaking even. The crowd gasped in awe. Victor smiled, soaking it in. This is what we built. This is our gift to humanity." My fingers hovered over the keys. This was the moment. I took a deep breath and pressed enter. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The system continued to hum along smoothly. Victor's smile never wavered. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the graphs began to twitch. Numbers fluctuated. Stability indicators dropped. The technicians frowned, whispering to each other. Victor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly covered it up with more bravado. I typed another command. The failsafe dug deeper, pulling at the fragile threads Victor had stitched together. More anomalies appeared on the screen. Entire grids flickered. Warning lights flashed. Gasps rippled through the audience. Victor turned, confusion in his eyes. That's just a minor display error," he said quickly, forcing a laugh. "Nothing to worry about." But it wasn't just the display. The system was unraveling. I leaned closer to my laptop, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't just sabotage, it was proof. Proof that Victor had stolen my work, proof that he had rushed the rollout without proper testing, proof that his empire was built on lies. The giant screens behind him began to glitch. And then, suddenly, lines of code appeared, words I had planted long ago, hidden in the failsafe. Property of the original creator. Innovation cannot be stolen. This isn't his. The audience erupted into chaos. Journalists scrambled to record every second. Cameras zoomed in on the screens, capturing the damning evidence for the world to see. Victor spun around, his face pale, his mask of confidence shattering. "Cut it! Cut the feed!" he barked at the technicians. But it was too late. The feed was global. Millions of people were watching. For the first time in his career, Victor Langford looked small. I closed my laptop slowly, my heart steady, my breath calm. Around me, the room was chaos, but inside, I felt peace. Still, this was only the beginning. Because Victor wasn't going to crumble in one night. He would fight. He would claw. He would try to rebuild. But I wasn't done yet. Not until I watched his empire burn to the ground. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, headlines across the globe screamed Victor Langford's name, but not as a visionary, not as a pioneer, not as the future of clean energy. No. He was branded as a fraud, a thief, a man whose empire was built on stolen work and hollow promises. Clips of the showcase dominated every news channel, every social feed. The moment when the code appeared on the massive screen, the words declaring property of the original creator, was replayed again and again, a viral moment burned into history. Investors panicked. Stock prices for Langford Technologies plummeted, shedding billions within hours. Government regulators announced investigations. Lawsuits piled up so quickly that even Victor's army of lawyers couldn't keep up. But the worst blow came from within. His board of directors, the same people who had once worshipped him, turned on him overnight. They blamed him for the deception, for the reckless rollout, for destroying the company's reputation. By the end of the week, Victor Langford had been stripped of his title, his corner office, and his power. And yet, he wasn't finished. Victor fought like a cornered animal. He held press conferences insisting it was all a smear campaign, that shadowy rivals had hacked his systems. He screamed about jealous competitors and traitorous insiders. He even pointed fingers at me, dragging my name back into the spotlight after years of obscurity. But every word he spoke only made him look more desperate. Because I was ready. Ethan and I had prepared for this moment. We had documented everything, every stolen file, every meeting where my work had been presented as his, every patent violation, every NDA breach. Piece by piece, we handed the evidence to journalists, regulators, and rival corporations. The truth spread like wildfire. And the world was hungry for it. By the end of the month, Victor wasn't just disgraced, he was radioactive. His friends stopped answering his calls. His board cut him loose. His mansion went up for sale. The man who once stood on stages declaring himself the savior of humanity now stood alone, surrounded only by the wreckage of his own arrogance. As for me, I didn't just rebuild, I soared. With Ethan's help, I partnered with Langford's fiercest competitor, a company that had once been terrified of his dominance. Together, we launched the next phase of the technology, the version I had protected all those years ago, perfected in secret. The launch was everything Victor's had pretended to be: stable, clean, revolutionary. Cities lit up not with glitches and warnings, but with real, sustainable energy. The world cheered, not for a fraud, but for the true creator. And for the first time in years, I heard my name spoken with respect. Recognition. But the sweetest moment came weeks later. I was in my new office, sunlight streaming through glass walls, the hum of a thriving team around me. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. But something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was shaky, broken. "Please," he said. "I need your help." Victor Langford. Once, he had stolen everything from me. Once, he had mocked me, humiliated me, and thrown me out of my own dream. Now, his voice trembled with desperation. He begged for a job. A chance. Anything to survive. I let the silence stretch, savoring it. I thought about the years I'd spent in the shadows, the nights of doubt, the weight of betrayal. I thought about the showcase, about the screens lighting up with the truth, about the look on his face when the world turned against him. And then, finally, I spoke. "You know, Victor," I said softly, "you once told me the world only remembers winners." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Well, I guess we'll see if it remembers you." I hung up. And for the first time since the day he betrayed me, I felt whole again. This was revenge. Not loud, not messy, but absolute. Victor Langford had taken everything from me. And in the end, I had taken everything back. The empire he built on my stolen work was gone. His name was in ruins. His legacy ashes. Mine, though? Mine was just beginning.